All right. Am I streaming? Looks like it. Okay. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? We'll see if anyone joins in the chat. So far, it's just Chris in the voice chat. How you doing, Chris?
Been better.
All right. As usual, it's just our monthly thing, so we have no set subject whatsoever, so we can just kind of talk about whatever we want.
And as you can tell, judging by how Shane is, it's probably just going to be me talking for most of the night.
Maybe, because I'm still, no sooner do I start getting better from COVID than something else happens, and so we hit the time change, which I never do well, and then the weather went south here in North Carolina, and we've had some bad thunderstorms, and we had a few days of fairly warm sunshine. And it was just enough to get me start to feel better, and then it went south again.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did mention that, people fail to realize that the sun plays a big role in your health.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've got the light therapy lamp, which helps, but it's not the same thing, because not only are you not making the vitamin D you're supposed to, there's just something about going out in the sun, feeling the heat, the radiation from it, and just having it kind of come from all around you instead of, this tiny little box,
Yeah, that's another reason I've been taking my dog for daily walks now, not just because, for my personal health, because I'm trying to lose weight, but just to get out there and just see that sunlight,
Yep. Sunlight's been hiding from us the last few days, so that's kind of how I've been doing.
Will we talk more Harry Potter? Why? Why did something happen? Although, speaking of Harry Potter, I did read an article about, some SJW Harry Potter fans, they recognize that J.K. Rowling is crucial to the Harry Potter universe, so you kind of need her to help, if you're going to make a film or whatever. And they're basically saying, okay, here's what it is. She can still be a part, but she can't get paid. And I'm like, so basically you want her to work for no payment against her will.
So basically slave labor.
Yeah.
Why don't they want her to get paid?
Because she's a little bit critical of some of the transsexual SJWs, basically, because particularly the pronouns and all that, because she believes it demeans women, because as anyone who's read about her past knows, she's a diehard feminist, and she believes that a lot of the views of, the transsexual extremists are ironically undermining the feminist movement.
Yeah.
Because now it's offensive to be a woman, because a woman means you're cis, Well,
and also there have been all of these things that women have been trying to carve out, because they want to be able to, do it without having men interfering. What's the point of that if all a man has to do is put on a dress and a wig and say, I'm really a woman, don't you oppress me,
Yeah,
I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing if you go through the surgery and you change your birth certificate and everything else. But I mean, just to say, oh, well, you can just declare your sex at any time. It's like, that's dumb. Sorry.
Yeah. I actually saw this one comedian that said that, the irony is that the transsexual movement is actually reoppressing women, because it's proving that men are better women than women. Because here's the thing, when women, want to wear pretty clothes and all that, all the SJWs like, ooh, you can't do that. That's objectifying women. If you dress nice and pretty, you're promoting an unhealthy beauty standard. But when a guy, goes to the surgery and dresses up like a woman, everyone's like, yeah, you go, girl. Show them how beautiful you are.
Yeah. Well, and even in things like in women's sports, because you had the whole the whole stuff about trying to get, especially on college campuses, a good opportunities for women in sports. And now just a man can just declare himself to be a woman and, go and compete where they have all these physical advantages.
Yeah, Joe Rogan did a good episode on that, where he talked about transsexuals and MMA fighting, and there's plenty of infamous cases of these men who have been men for 30 years of their life. They undergo some minor surgery to make themselves look like a woman, but they still have the muscles and bones of a man. So they enter the women's league, and they just beat the crap out of all these girls. And these are some tough women, but they just can't keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang on, my mom's
But
calling.
it occurred to me that they don't gender segregate sports where it doesn't matter, because like from what I've seen, marathons are mixed gender, because I guess whatever differences you have, they kind of even themselves out over however long that is, 26 miles or whatever. I think Chris stepped away from the mic. Do you think nanobots and genetic enhancements can even the playing field? No, I think it'll throw it even more off kilter. Because then it'll be about who can afford the genetic enhancements. You back, Chris?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry,
Okay. Yeah, I was mentioning that that I don't think marathons are gender segregated, because I guess all the differences even themselves out over, 20 however many miles it is.
Yeah.
That when they gender segregate sports, it's generally for a very good reason.
Yeah. Actually, Shane, you know what else is something? Now, granted, this isn't really talked about as much anymore, but it's an idea that everyone seems to think is hateful, but it actually makes perfect sense. It's the idea. It was those people that said AIDS people should be allowed to participate in sports and all that. To which I say, well, it depends on the sport, because here's the thing. Yes, we know that AIDS isn't transmitted through physical contact by touching, but we do know it can be passed on through blood. And what happens in some of those physical contact sports?
Yeah, like if it's MMA, it's one thing. If it's a marathon, it's something else entirely.
Yeah.
Not a lot of bloodshed in marathons.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, you see those stories about how, there's that AIDS, athlete, that wants to be on the basketball, football, or hockey team. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, but those do have a lot more physical contact, and physical contact means more risk of injuries, and injuries means blood spilling.
Yep.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, someone gets a bloody nose, someone else loses a tooth,
Yeah, that's what I want to ask them. It's like, you're all upset about, well, what about me being able to play? It's like, well, what about that other player? What if you they toss a football at you and you get conked on the face and get a bloody nose, and some of that blood gets on another guy, and he happens to have a cut on his skin and it gets in there? Congratulations, you just potentially infected him.
Well, there are people who say that people with AIDS shouldn't even have to disclose that to a lover.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah. Hey, Kitty! It has been a while.
Kitty? Where?
Do you think Newsom's going to lift the lockdown as quickly as he can without making it look too obvious? I don't think it's going to matter at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, fun fact, my brother-in-law, he has a brother in San Diego, and it mentioned that he's moving to Kansas City, and I asked him, why is he going to Kansas City? It's like, because he needs to get out of California, and I jokingly told my in-laws, it's like, well, considering the state California's in, I don't blame them. And I love how in your last Bogosity podcast, like how... he's blaming all his shortcomings on how, there's a Republican conspiracy to overthrow me, but there hasn't been a powerful Republican and a significant, point of power since the 1990s, if you mentioned that one guy. Yeah. I can't remember.
It was the guy before Gray Davis.
Yeah.
What was his name? Oh, Kitty Cutie's on Twitter now. My condolences. Get your waiters on.
Yeah. Well, I hope they're the good kind of friends.
Yeah. 40% of the recall is from Democrats. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty sad. The AIDS thing isn't decriminalization. It went from felony to misdemeanor because it being a felony was deterring people from getting tested.
I don't know, because if I recall correctly, that's only like if you don't know and you accidentally spread it on. This is like if you do know,
Yeah.
but you have unprotected sex anyway, because that's arguably
Yeah,
arguably a form of assault.
That pretty much is third-degree murder there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, we're talking about people who are already tested, know they're infected, and don't tell their partners.
Yeah. Also, I want to say something. I speak kind of this kind of is kind of ironically like AIDS, because yesterday I was talking about the whole COVID vaccine debacle, and I jokingly said, you know what someone should do? They should start a Dallas Buyers Club for the COVID vaccine.
How so? How so?
I don't know. I'm just saying someone should do it. Yeah. 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 I saw bits of, I haven't seen the movie in its entirety, but I have seen some scenes. That is a really good movie. I wish I could see the entire version of it.
Yeah. I never saw it. I guess that's why I'm confused.
Yeah. Well, it's based on a real life guy who after he was diagnosed with AIDS, he was basically told, "Yep, you've got AIDS. You've only got, a couple months to live." But then he later learns out that that there is an experimental treatment out there that can actually, weaken the virus and increase his life expectancy. So he gets it and it works, but it gives him, some bad side effects. And then another person says, well, there's actually an updated version of that drug that doesn't have as bad side effects, but the problem is it hasn't gone through FDA approval, so it's not even available for testing, but it is available in Mexico. So he starts out a group that basically it's a club, but one of the perks is that you get medicine from Mexico, basically. And of course he gets in trouble with the FDA and all that, and they're like, hey, that's dangerous and all that. There's actually a funny line, where his friend says you can't be using that kind of drug. It hasn't been approved by the FDA. And he was like, screw the FDA. I'm gonna be DOA.
Yeah, Kitty says I pretty much just post memes and draw. Yeah, I think it depends on which community you're in. Stay out of politics, but like the Blender community on it is really good, and on Reddit as well. And there's also a lot more now that Babylon 5 is on HBO now. I think there's been a lot more interactions with the creator than pretty much there was since originally when he was on Usenet and it was going through its first run. So there are the good things. Everyone, I am here. I'm going to stay here, but I'm going to turn the cam off because I'm just, yeah. I'll do better if I can just lean back and relax. So.
Yeah. Don't die on us.
Nope. Still here, just.
Yeah. This space is intentionally left blank, huh?
Yeah.
Trying to think of something funny to put the context to it.
Well, that's generally what you see, like in books or instruction manuals or whatever, when they have a page break and they need to start on, the right-hand page, but they don't have anything to fill the left page. They'll put that on there just to let people know that they're not supposed to expect anything there. So
yeah,
I was just making a joke out of that.
Oh.
Let's see. Have you ever witnessed Twitter manipulating your like and RT? I do so little tweeting, whatever. Yeah. And when I do, it's actually not often political. I mean, a lot of times I'll reply to something, but.
Yeah. Excuse me? Sorry, I hiccuped a little bit, so.
I guess something else is going on now that's kind of interesting, but I don't think I'll cover on the podcast, is how the Derek Chauvin trial has been going so far, where they're all kind of embroiled in jury selection. And it's like the defense is bringing this up again, and I think they're right. They just need to switch venues, because just being a few blocks away from where it happened, especially...
Can't courts do that? Like, can't they say, look, this is getting out of control. This is a heated situation, and a lot of locals want the defendants, head on a silver plate. So, in order to make sure that the trial is fair and just, can we do it outside somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I mean, they can absolutely do that. And like one of the things that happened this week was that the city just settled with Floyd's heirs for like $27 million, and jurors were saying, yeah, when I heard that, my jaw hit the floor. And the judge was like, well, you're not supposed to be, listening to that. And they're like, but we can't avoid it. One of the jurors, and I think they actually excused him, one of the jurors said, look, when I go to work and I go into the break room, they have the TV on all the time. It's always to the news, and they are constantly covering this. I can't avoid it if I want to keep working.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, with what's been going on, I can understand why a lot of people are reluctant to be in this trial, because because a lot of people have said they're scared that if they make one wrong decision, their house might get burnt down.
Yeah.
Because don't get me wrong,
a lot of them were excused because they're saying, yeah, I'm afraid for my life.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Derek Chauvin, committed a horrible, committed a horrible act. But the difference between a just society and a banana republic is that in a banana republic, if you're guilty, an angry mob drags you out of your home, burns your house down, and hangs you from a tree. Whereas in a civilized society, no matter what evil of an act you did, you still get a fair and speedy trial.
SKM, any opinion on the Grammys? I didn't see it personally, but heard Cardi B's performance is making headlines. Yeah, I didn't see it either, and I don't even know who Cardi B is. But everything I've heard so far, it's nothing that they didn't say about Madonna back in the 80s.
Yeah. Speaking of the Grammys, I saw a John Stossel special about the Grammys, and apparently you don't even have to be a singer, a singer or a musician to win a Grammy now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton got a Grammy.
Oh, it's crazy. But, I mean, here's the thing. Every generation thinks that they're the ones that invented sex and no one before had anything to do with sex. And every generation thinks that the next generation that's doing all this new stuff is just horrible and depraved, and it's literally porn and everything else. And I'll bet you anything, if you took a time machine back tens of thousands of years ago, you'd see hunter-gatherer cultures doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we're that different. I don't think things have changed that much. Get over it, everyone.
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure when the bow and arrow was invented, there were like those older tribes saying, this bow and arrow pussy stuff. Back in my day when I was a youngling, we used wooden clubs to kill our prey. It turned us into men.
Yeah, and we had to go uphill to hunt. Both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm even just talking about, the sex stuff, because people seem to think like, oh, all this stuff you see in porn nowadays, all this depraved stuff. I bet you anything, caveman sex was just like that. They were doing the same things that we are.
Well,
all the same kinky stuff. Yeah.
Well, here's a perfect example of that. There's a rather famous Japanese painting called "The Dream of a Fisherman's Wife," where there's a woman I won't go into too much details, but she's having an affair with a giant squid, and that was written in the 1800s.
Well, and there's all these like ancient Roman and Greek frescoes that depict all sorts of crazy stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Tessie Pallimate, the lady that made fun of a cancer patient. I haven't heard that. Aung San Suu Kyi. And what is going on in Myanmar? Another new one on me.
Oh, basically, the country has been taken over by another military junta.
No.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny about Myanmar because that's a country that doesn't get talked about because for over 20 years it was ruled by a military junta, and guess what the political party that was in control of the military junta was called? It was called the Burmese Way to Socialism, and it was founded on socialist principles, and it completely destroyed the Burmese economy. Yeah. Nobody
SKM,
talks about it,
exactly.
though.
If your society can fall apart from lewd images, it's so weak it deserves to collapse. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually heard that really the only sex only became demonized because when the Christians took power, they wanted to use it as a form of control, and their argument, and because I'm pretty sure a lot of people have heard this one time, their argument was, oh, look at the Romans, they used to have public orgies and practice bisexuality, and look what happened to them.
Yeah.
Where even though many historians have pointed out, yeah, when that happened, when they did all that stuff, that was when they were in their prosperous days. Yeah, exactly, JC Armitage. Has there ever been a society that's collapsed because of too much freedom? If anything, you can tell when a society is on the verge of collapse when the government starts going, you can't do this, you can't say that, you can't do this, you can't say that.
And when they're debauching the currency, because that's something else that ancient Rome did, they kept making the denarius, a smaller and smaller amount of silver, so that they could make the tax money go further. And
yeah.
Yep, look at how Rome collapsed. Look at what we're doing now.
Oh yeah. It's kind of sad because it's like we never learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of not learning from history, I'm pretty sure you saw that stupid comment in that one video I got with that one guy, with some people. It was over the Civil War. Because it's like people are still insistent. No, the Civil War was 100% over slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, all the Soviet Union, same thing.
Yeah.
As Mark Twain said, history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yep. Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen that Freedom Tunes joke about Karl Marx, where Karl Marx keeps denying, that keeps saying that it'll work next time. The truth is, the same can be said of every single bad political and economic idea. It's like, well, we tried that. Well, the Romans tried that and it didn't work. Well, it'll work this time. This time, the ancient European empires collapse, and modern nations are like, okay, it didn't work for those guys, but it'll definitely work for us.
Yeah.
By the way, that one guy who was talking about who was quote unquote debunking quote unquote Civil War myths, you know what his argument for quote unquote debunking the idea that terrorists were a reason of the Civil War is that he said, well, if you look at this document from the port of New York, you'll see this. And I'm like, oh, so you're looking at New York and not like the ports of Boston or Charleston.
Yep.
Yeah. And I will say this, Shane, the absolute worst argument ever is when people say, yeah, it was all about secession. They were seceding for the right to keep their slaves, to which I say, no, it shouldn't matter why they're seceding. The point is they wanted to secede at all, I think there was that one abolitionist that said that basically when he heard that the South was seceding, his argument was good riddance. Let them secede.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just the thing that baffles me, Shane. It's like, why do people not want to actually learn from history? They just want to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, I think this morning's video explains a lot of that.
Yeah, it's that sense of tribalism. Once you get, we're still stuck with that tribalistic mentality,
Well, because it's effective.
Yeah.
Now, was that Spooner or Garrison you were talking about?
I don't remember. I don't think it was Spooner. I think it was another guy you mentioned. You know, he was a prominent abolitionist, and even though he was anti-slavery, he was against he was against the actions to you know, that the Union took against the South.
Well, because I know Garrison was actually advocating that the North secede. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, just let them to it. We'll secede and we'll make a free society with no slavery.
Yeah. What's even more disturbing about that video with the comments was that there were a lot of people justifying war crimes conducted by the South against the Union, because I kept asking them, listen, if you truly want to free the slaves, how is burning down towns and villages and imposing harsh economic sanctions on occupied cities and towns, you know, a good idea? And they're all like, well, that was needed to bring the war to an end sooner.
And how did that bring the war to an end sooner?
Yeah, exactly. And you know,
that's what they always say, though. That's what they said about World War I. It's what they said about World War II. It's what they said about every single atrocity. We had to commit this atrocity so we could end the war sooner.
Funny thing about World War II is because the subject of Dresden got
You've cut off.
And this guy kept insisting that Dresden was not. Well, I was saying that Dresden also got brought up in that comment war, and this guy kept insisting that Dresden was a legit target and that it was an absolute necessary. And finally, after showing him all the evidence proving he was wrong, he still insisted it. And I told him, you know, people like you are the reason why Kurt Vonnegut wrote Slaughterhouse 5.
Well, Vonnegut was there.
Correctly, yeah, because if I recall correctly, in Vonnegut's book, you know, that guy meets those aliens and they have that bomb that's capable of blowing up entire planets. And when he asks them, why would you invent such a thing? They say, well, we have to do it. If we don't do it, our enemies will invent it and they'll kill us.
Yeah.
You know.
But yeah, he was actually a prisoner of war at Dresden, and he survived because he was actually in a slaughterhouse, which is where he got the idea for the title from.
Yeah.
And because he wrote about, you know, what it was like finally coming out of there and just watching the city, you know, having been flattened.
And I also heard that it was also written, like I said earlier, partially because of the response to it, is because even though Kurt Vonnegut, you know, didn't like the Nazis, he felt that the Allies were going a little bit overboard with their war on fighting them, and everyone kept saying, well, that's what we have to do to win war. We got to show these Nazis who's boss, you know. And it's pretty funny because, you know, people always say, you know, well, if we didn't bomb Dresden, the war would have lasted long and led to more Allied casualties. But I brought up, no, it actually led to more Allied casualties because you know what it did? It convinced the German people that the Allies would show them no mercy, and therefore they were more willing to fight to the very end. That's why the Battle of Berlin was so bloody, was because many Germans felt that they were going to get killed either way, so they figured, well, I might as well die fighting.
Well, yeah, because Dresden was, you know, gave the Nazis the perfect opportunity to, you know, say to the people, you know, they point and go, see the people we're fighting against here.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like you know, as the old saying goes, you don't prove yourself you're the better person by being a bigger asshole. Yeah. That's another thing about World War II. Like, there were so many commanders on the Allied side that if you were to apply the Nuremberg trials logic to and put them on the stand, they'd be all hanged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Zhukov, Curtis LeMay, all those guys, they'd be hanged. Yeah.
Who was the one who turned away those ships full of Jewish refugees that that ended up being killed, and they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize?
I can't remember, but I know that's another thing too. You know, I mean, it's like other people are like, well, we had to stop the Holocaust. It's like, well, you know what would have stopped the Holocaust without needing to bomb and kill innocent German people? Letting Jews immigrate to other countries.
Yeah, but it wasn't really about saving the Jews. That was just,
Yeah.
no more than the North fought the Civil War to free the slaves or
Oh yeah.
any of those things, yeah. It was just like in Vietnam, we had to save the village by destroying it. Samey, samey.
And actually, and in all honesty, Shane, Vietnam actually proved another interesting thing that I'm surprised that the U.S. still hasn't learned from, and that's strategic bombing was a one-trick pony. It worked in World War II, and that's the only war where it quote unquote work. Everywhere else it's been done, all it's led is to people hating the nation that bombed them even more. So,
yeah.
I mean, hell, the United Kingdom, which is a pretty powerful military group, it got rid of all of its strategic bombers. Because, dropping massive bombs, doesn't really work,
Well, the thing about Japan SKM is they were always like that.
Yeah.
They only stopped well, for the most part, they stopped like that after World War II because they have this idea that if you're conquered by an enemy, then you should try to emulate your enemy. But I mean, yeah, there's still a lot of ways in which they're kind of backwards, but at least they're not, beheading everyone they run into.
Yeah. Well, yeah, unfortunately, Japan is still feudalistic in its social views. Like, like here's the thing: the Japanese are
it's still very classist.
Yeah, they're very collectivistic. They are, from what I've heard from people that have been in Japan for extended periods of time, the Japanese are very collectivistic when it comes to their social views, and they have a strong believing that the greater good of the community as a whole is better than the individual.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of Japanese companies, operate almost like religious, some churches, because that's just their belief,
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not getting a job, as a means, to give yourself and your family a better life. You're doing this for the greater good of the company and the Japanese people.
Yeah, and if you put your own needs and the needs of your family ahead of that of the company, you're, committing this horrible sin.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Like that's why you hear those stories, like with Japanese game companies where another game company offers, that person a better deal, and they tell their old boss, hey, it's been a good run and I wish you the best of luck, but my wife, and now she's pregnant, and this other company's offering me a better deal. They're giving me better pay, and when they leave, the boss will be like, oh yeah, that's cool and all that, but then they'll contact the company and say, oh yeah, this person, he's a filthy traitor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Japan's working hours, again, according to people who have worked and lived in Japan, it's not really free markets. Like I said, it's because Japan, socially, they still practice neo-feudalism, so it's not really a matter of greed or money, it's more about your rank, basically, the whole senpai versus Korhai thing,
What do you think about the working hours there? People trying to attribute it to free markets. But if you look at the IOEF working hours, they vary widely. I don't really know enough about it to be able to say.
Well, let's put it this way, Shane. One of the reasons why Japan has a low birth rate and a high suicide slash mental health crisis is because socially, Japanese people are expected to put a lot of their time and effort, into their work, and it's not unheard of for because the average Japanese job, is the usual 8 to 5 job, but it's not unheard of for a lot of Japanese people to work, several hours overtime afterwards, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if the production is falling behind or whatever, they'll stay over and.
Well, but
there was a comedy with Michael Keaton and Getty Watanabe called GungHo, where they covered a lot of issues like that because the idea is they work at a car factory that's been taken over by the Japanese, and so there's that clash of cultures and about what the Japanese expect out of the American workers and vice versa.
Yeah. In Japan, that's another thing too about Japanese work ethic is that, they believe how much time you put into something is more important than whether or not, how efficiently you did it.
Yeah.
That's why even if you're meeting all your quotas correctly, if you're, not spending enough time at work, they might pull you in and say, why aren't you spending more time at work? Like, why are you leaving, shortly after you get done, why aren't you doing more? And if you say, well, because I'm getting all my stuff done, I'm getting it done on time, there's nothing for me to do, so and my thing is over, so and their argument is going to be, so you're being disloyal. That's another fun fact too I've read about from a lot of places is that it doesn't matter what you're scheduled for, you do not leave before the boss leaves.
Yeah.
Like, if you're scheduled to work 9 to 5 and the boss is working 10 to 8, if you leave at 5 o'clock, the boss is going to be like, why are you leaving before me? That's disrespectful. So you have to make up an excuse to stay later. Hmm. And again, I think the reason Japan acts like that is because, with the exception of its imperial days, Japan has been isolationist for most of its existence.
Yeah. They still pretty much are. A lot of the gaijin who go there and live there, have a very difficult time, acclimating and becoming accepted. And
Oh yeah, I've heard, a lot of, people that have lived and worked in Japan. Some people have even emigrated, and they say they can speak Japanese fluently, they can read Japanese, they know all about it, and they're still treated as if they weren't Japanese. It's like, even
yeah,
if they have a new Japanese identity, they're like, nope, you weren't born here, so you're not Japanese. That's another thing too that people fail to that I think could also help, Japanese with their work condition, is they need to let more people immigrate to Japan and bring some of their ideals there and find that right balance. But unfortunately, we live in an era where it's like, oh no, cultures can't be appropriated. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of like when Mark Salzman went to China to learn wushu from Pan Ching Fu. One of the things he mentioned that just kept constantly happening there was no matter how long he stayed there and no matter how long you got to know it, like one of the things he said was every time he went to a Chinese restaurant, they always gave him a fork instead of chopsticks.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was perfectly proficient with chopsticks, but there's like, oh, white guy, okay, you get a fork.
Yeah. Actually, one funny story I read about a guy, who worked in Japan for close to a decade, and he can speak Japanese, fluently, almost like a native speaker. And he says it's hard because, like, he says, I've had plenty of times where I've gone to a shop and I've spoken clear Japanese, and the person just looks at me confused, like, it's like, but you're a Westerner, you can't know our language. And then, like, they act all confused, so they go to their manager, and they're like, this person spoke perfect Japanese in front of me. Like, what am I supposed to do? They act like baffled. It's like, what?
But on the other hand, I've heard that the way you impress people in China is like if you want to ask the waiter for something and you say, I don't know how the word's pronounced, but I know the character, and you draw the character on a napkin, they're really impressed when Westerners show that they know how to do characters because they know how hard their language is.
Yeah. Also, another thing I've heard about the Chinese is that if you're ever in China, do not bow as a form of greeting. They'll actually be personally insulted because they're like, what? Are you assuming we're Japanese? Yeah. They actually prefer just a steady, firm handshake. Not too firm, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Although, sadly, that's not anymore now, because now there's a new policy, which is don't criticize the party. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I've actually heard from some people that were actually granted permission to take a vacation to North Korea. Apparently, there's a rule that says if you walk by a picture of Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, you have to stop, bow, and say like a prayer in their name, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was, what was it? I don't remember the details, but it was like an American, I think, was vacationing over there. And all he did was like there was a poster of one of the Kims in his hotel room, and he took it down, and it was this like major crime.
Yeah, they imprisoned him. They imprisoned him for a while, and when they finally released him, he died short. He died shortly, and then he died in prison. And they kept asking, "Well, what did he die of?" They said, "Oh yeah, he died of pneumonia." But when they got his body, they found that he had a lot of parasites. He had beatings, just yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Russia's the same way. Hey, what happened to that Russian reporter who was criticizing Putin that ended up in prison? Oh yeah, he's dead. What he die of? Oh, he died of pneumonia, real tragically. But how come this autopsy report said that he had multiple bone fractures and bruises to his head and chest? He died of pneumonia.
It was really bad pneumonia.
Yeah, really bad pneumonia. Really bad.
Bone-breaking pneumonia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like reminds me of this one episode of Sherlock when what was the detective's name? Lestrade. It comes over there was a guy who had broken in or something like that, and so it was like, well, how did he die? It's like he fell out of the window. How many times did he fall out of the window? I lost count.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yep, classic example. Yeah, classic example. Yep, or another classic gallows humor joke is, there's a wife, in the hospital because she's got a really bad bruise around her eye, and there's her husband next to her who's muscular, has a wife beater on and all that, and is giving her an intimidated look, and the doctor's like, "So what gave you this nasty bruise?" And she's like, "Oh, I was hit. Oh, I fell down the stairs down the stairs." And you don't have any injuries elsewhere, and the husband's like, "She fell down the stairs." Yeah.
Oh yes, the defenestrations.
Defenestration.
What was it? Was it in the 100 Years' War when they had all those defenestrations?
What's a defenestration again?
When you throw someone out the window.
Oh, yeah.
When is the next How to Argue video going to be made? When I think of a good one.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. What's your opinion about Texas and the red states seceding? Whatever.
Yeah.
As long as they're going to have a government, it's still going to be bad.
Yeah.
30 Years' War. Okay, thanks.
You know, Shane, the
30 Years' War, I mean, that should just be a lesson for everyone, because they started out, I guess you kind of had the Italian and Catholic areas, you had the Germanic areas, and I guess you had kind of the French areas, all fighting, all trying to gain any ground for like 30 years. And at the end of it, they were just like, none of us have made any progress at all. All we're doing is just destroying our own countries. Let's just call it off.
Yeah. A lesson that they didn't learn when World War I rolled around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shane, that really old video you did about the sunk cost fallacy, some people have actually argued that's why wars keep dragging on even when they get ridiculous, because, because they reach that point where they're like, well, we don't want to admit we lost, it's like, if we stop fighting now, all those troops that died, they died for nothing. Yeah. And I mean, I've gotten a lot of hate for saying this. That's why I'm not a fan of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, because they're all like, those men died for your freedom to say that. No, first of all, that's not true. Second of all, they're the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. For all I know, they could be mostly German troops. And second of all, they didn't die because they loved their country and freedom. They they did it because they were either forced to fight via conscription or were pressured by society to enlist.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. You know, they were told if you sign up, you'll be an officer, you'll have this great shiny badge on your chest and all that. And what they didn't tell you is that you're probably gonna die. You're probably gonna die a forgetful death in a mud trench.
Oh God, I remember this was decades ago, but they were talking about, like DNA identifying, soldiers' remains and things like that, so you can properly notify their family and everything like that. And some flunky politician, I don't even remember who it was lamenting that there would be no more Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, no more unknown soldiers to be the unsung heroes. And it's like, wait a minute, are you actually saying it's a bad thing that families will know what happened to their loved ones?
Yeah. And actually, the thing that baffles me the most about the unknown soldier are the guards who guard the unknown soldier, because it's like they have these ridiculously high standards, and you're in order to be qualified, like you have to assemble the uniform properly, and it must be within 3/4 of an inch, on target, or else it's considered bad. To which I said, okay, listen, whoever came up with those rules was clearly some officer who had nothing else better to do on his hands,
Yeah, consumer. It was a 30 years war with a 20-year ceasefire. Yeah, World War I and World War II.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, that's what one French general said after he read the Treaty of Versailles. He's like, "This is not a peace treaty. It's just a 20-year ceasefire." Yeah.
Gina Carano and the Muppets. A lot of people are pissed at him about the Muppets.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it probably wouldn't be so bad if it were just the disclaimer, but kids can't watch the Muppets. You have to have an adult profile to watch the Muppets.
Yeah, isn't that hilarious?
That's crazy.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, like, they couldn't even. Hey, Wes. They couldn't even say, like, specifically why they were doing that. But one of the things that reporters were able to get out there is, an episode that had Johnny Cash, because he was singing in front of a Confederate flag. And if you look at the episode, it's like this set where, there's this big barn, and the Confederate flag is like way in the back with an American flag next to it. And it's like, okay, well, I guess if you had a telescope, you could.
Yeah.
But they were kind of making it sound like he was like Patton in front of this like giant Confederate flag or something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, JC, I think I covered this on the podcast. The Muppets are apparently racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I want to tell Anita Sarkeesian back when she did that whole everything is racist, everything is sexist, you have to point it out. You know what I would have loved to tell her? Well, then by your own logic, you're racist and sexist.
Exactly.
What you tell them is, and if everything's that and I'm everything, that makes me God.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, what was it that Edmund Burke said? He who would accuse all of humanity is sure to condemn only one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not a religious person either, but there's also a famous passage in the Bible where Jesus tells people, "He who is without sin cast the first stone."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And judge not lest you be judged.
Yeah. Yeah, the Bible's weird like that. It's like in the beginning of the Bible, you have this vengeful, angry, hateful God that, like, if someone even sneezes and interrupts his saying, he's like, burn down their city and take their women and children as slaves. And then later he's all like, oh no, you should love thy neighbor regardless of their beliefs or behaviors.
Well, there's this like one kind of little, gracious area, like from like early in the Gospels towards like 2/3 of the end of each of the Gospels. And then after that, it goes back to being vengeful and hellfire and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there was that one comedian that said that if hell exists, does exist, that's only proof that God is not, this kind and all-loving being, because no kind and all-loving being would create such an evil and terrible dimension to punish people he disliked.
Well, there's just the problem of evil that no one still has a good answer for.
Yeah.
Sorry I'm late, gentlemen.
No problem.
So what are your topics tonight so far?
You know us, whatever we feel like talking about at the time.
I'm doing most of the topic bringing because Shane's really out of it because of daylight savings and the bad weather. And just when he was recovering from COVID, too. I said COVID. We're going to get banned now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say COVID or COVID or something like that. Try to... Not saying the virus is a con. I'm saying that because obvious actual reason you can say that. The reaction.
You're just trying to get around the algorithm, yeah.
Yeah. You know it's funny because a lot of people are comparing the COVID pandemic to the Spanish flu, and you know what is one thing that's similar? Is that just like with COVID, when the Spanish flu first came out, they were literally doing everything in their power to censor it. I've even heard.
Well, that's why it's called Spanish flu. It actually took a while for it to get to Spain, but Spain was the only one that was allowing people to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I even remember hearing somewhere in a documentary that, that the governments were afraid that because World War I was still going on at the time and they were afraid the flu would prevent people from signing up. So they were actually telling hospitals, listen, if someone comes in with influenza and they die, don't write down they died from the flu, make up that they died from something else.
Consumer, I think
I'm sorry, go ahead. You first.
Yeah, my skin sensitivity is pretty much gone. I don't really have the COVID smell anymore. My taste is back. I think it's still not quite at 100% my full energy levels.
Yeah. And as we said earlier, the daylight savings isn't helping. Yeah.
Well, and just from a chronic pain standpoint, I never do well during the time change, especially when we have the extra hour, because that way it's just that much longer until I can it's just another hour until I can take my pain medicine again, and then when the weather goes south, so do I. So
yeah.
Yes, there absolutely was conscription during World War I, and it was protests about that led to a lot of the horrible First Amendment violations we're still suffering from.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's another thing, too, that when I was talking earlier about the Civil War, that one guy was like, it's like, oh, really? What did the Union do to infringe on the Constitution? And one of them I brought up was they would literally shut down your newspaper office if all you did was say that Abraham Lincoln had smelly armpits.
Just read Ex parte Milligan.
Yeah. Yeah, I even read a story on a documentary about the Civil War that reportedly there was one guy who got arrested and was charged with treason, and what was his traitorous act that harmed the Union? Reportedly, he told an army recruiter, "I wouldn't wipe my ass with the stars and stripes."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's using the military to put down war protests and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of the whole, the talking about right to death is something else. They're doing it, but they're flip-flopping. Even if they have any sign of the COVID, like, what was it? Was it exosomes? Did I say that correctly, or did I say it wrong?
The what?
No, what am I trying to think? What is the viral DNA RNA in the residue that they catch in this, like in your phlegm or sputum or whatever?
Oh, it's just RNA.
Anyway,
it's just pieces of the RNA genome.
Saying anyone who has that or has other detectable symptoms of the virus, it doesn't matter if they died of something else. Let's write it as COVID death.
Oh yeah.
Well, they've been doing that, and they finally, the CDC finally said, "Hey, maybe we should stop doing that." As soon as Biden took office, and the WHO said the same thing about the testing, And it's like, yeah, so now we're going to be counting things differently so that things that used to be counted as COVID cases aren't, and things that used to be counted as COVID deaths aren't. And so now people are going to be going, oh, look, ever since Biden took office, COVID cases and deaths are down. Must be because of Biden.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole, that's what I've been telling people all this time. You know, COVID isn't as bad as people were saying they were just saying it was the next Black Plague because they were trying for political reasons. Because, you know, look at H1N1 pandemic, that spread all over the place and it was deadlier than COVID-19, you know, viral wise, but barely anyone gave a crap about it.
Well, because what it was doing was it was displacing other forms of influenza. And the people it was killing were people who would have died from another form of influenza anyway.
Well, and another thing too is that it occurred when there wasn't a major political event going on, like an election. So, because I mean, it's like when the H1N1 came out, you know, yes, there was panic, but you know, there was no, yeah, you need to social distance, everyone's got to wear a mask. All that happened was every now and then in school we would watch a PSA about how, and remember, when you sneeze into your shoulder.
Yep.
Although I will say one thing that's so funny is that they're talking about how you gotta wash your hands and all that, and I'm just thinking, wow, it takes a global pandemic for people to be practicing basic hygiene that you should be practicing no matter what.
That's true. And yeah. JC, there is basically no good reason for daylight saving time.
Yeah. Yeah, we mentioned this at the beginning. It was invented solely because the nations at war in World War I were trying to save coal and oil, so they implemented it thinking that people would stay up earlier and not use as much coal and oil, but it didn't work.
Yeah, but they never changed it.
Yeah, but despite the fact that it didn't work, they forgot to change it back.
But the thing is, if you're looking, if you want to define your time zone, because I looked it up, if you want to define your time zone as basically when noon is, and you want to try to get noon as close to 12 o'clock as possible, it's weird because when the actual, you know, sun's apex is during the day is going to vary by like half an hour over the year. And of course, it depends on where you are in your state. North Carolina is kind of a wide state, but even in the mountains, you don't get the proper noon any earlier than 12:15. Over on the coast, Wes, we're getting additional noise from you on your end. Yeah, but over on the coast, it's like really close to 1 o'clock. So if anything, it would make more sense for us to, you know, go into quote unquote daylight saving time and just be in the Atlantic time zone and just stay on that year round without moving the clocks, than it is to try to keep going back to Eastern time, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Another thing too was when you was talking, we went back to the writing of the deaths thing, marketing. You know, it was fun. So we got inflated COVID death statistics. We have total case statistics fucking nerfed out the ass. We'll probably never know how many actual cases are. You know what I mean? Because the CCFP. Yeah. I won't tell you what that means. I might type it, but I won't say it because I'm not trying to get you trouble. But yeah, I'll just type it. You might.
Yeah, look at the video I did recently on applying the Bayesian calculator to COVID testing, and why, even as good as the PCR test is, why it's not really the whole story.
No, it's not. There was another. There was a guy in one of them in a Pro Hoppa server I recently joined who did a whole thing about why the racialists and the Marxists that like to spew about IQ, how arbitrary that it can be, you know, on its own.
But basically, if the prevalence of COVID in your area is 1%. Even as good as the test is, if I'm still getting it from your end. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. It's very disorienting. But anyway, even as good as the PCR test is, with that as your prior, if you get a positive result, it's still only about a 50-50 chance that you've actually got COVID. And so to try and narrow it down further, you either need further testing or you need to look at symptoms or, who you've been in contact with or whatever.
Actual further testing and go into virology, essentially. Epidemiology is that shit.
Yeah, I mean, you just need to...
The biggest concern I have is when you have a massive body of epidemiologists in a medical board. That's kind of concerning because a lot of fuckers screech at me for saying it, but I don't care. It is the truth. Epidemiology is looking at correlations in order to try to find something to form a hypothesis. It is something you build a hypothesis on.
Right.
That's not evidence. Period.
Well, I mean, I think any good epidemiologist would agree with you on that. They're saying like, yeah, we find all these correlations and then we try to, figure out who's who and what's what from all that.
And I appreciate those that would do that. It's the motherfuckers that they're working for that are using their shit that has me extremely concerned.
Well, it's the ones that are in political organizations who are. Exactly. I mean, I've covered like the CDC and the WHO to death. I mean, the CDC does an awesome job at collecting data, but they will actually go against their own data when making policy recommendations if the data goes against the policy they want to recommend.
Oh yeah, they got a fucking political. This is what I always love to tell. Like, I love these guys that are pro, like, the absolutists, right? You've heard of them? Absolutists? Or
like, what do you mean?
Or the neo-reactionary absolutists that say, well, fuck corporation. I'm like, how do they get that power in the first place? The very thing you fucking advocate for. You fucking head ass.
Yeah.
A couple times I've made a couple screeching and called them men children because it's what they fucking were. It's like that, it's like the meme, like Brent Ancap, the meme maker. What was that? How Steve Horowitz meme? That was the reaction I got. Take the lefty rhetoric out, but yeah.
SKM says like Paul Krugman in economics. Another good example is Joseph Stiglitz, because if you look at a certain edition of his macroeconomics textbook, he talks in detail and all the reasons why, under no uncertain terms, minimum wage destroys jobs and there's no way that it couldn't. And I mean, it's a pretty solid case. In the next edition of the textbook, that whole passage is gone. All the reasons why it might happen are there, the price controls and everything else. But the passage specifically about the minimum wage is just gone. What happened in between those two editions of the textbook was he became the economic advisor of Bill Clinton when he was president.
Yep, that was it.
Yep.
And the whole case was bullshit from the beginning. Yep. But hey, I like the channel Economics Explained when they get shit right, when he gets shit right, but he's still a Keynesian. Like, he underplays the importance of Say's Law, for instance. I'm like, are you fucking like the last?
Well, I guess that's better than
debunking minimum wage, but he underplayed Say's Law, and I'm like, are you fucking serious?
I guess that's
Everything
better than.
You said was great until that point. You just fucked yourself.
I guess that's better than completely denying Say's Law like most Keynesians want to do.
It is, but still, fuck. Even Keynes, before he died, was willing to fucking completely change his beliefs and shit. And he told F.A. Hayek, and when they used to talk, it's like, I do think there's some form of a societal feedback mechanism system that becomes like an invisible hand guiding things.
Yep. And he wrote the same thing. And he wrote the same thing to a couple of other people, and then he had his last essay, which was published posthumously, said something about, everything I came up with. It turns out it was really only good for the Depression era economy, and now we need to, go back and figure out the proper economics for, long-term prosperity. And I mean, if he hadn't died, right then and there in 46, if he had lived another 10 years, who knows how different things would have been.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, F.A. Hayek, who actually ironically was a close friend of Keynes, even said that,
Yep.
Yeah, what? They were best friends for years. They disagreed with each other like motherfuckers on economics, but they were best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they were really close. And honestly, from when I learned about this stuff and when I learned about when Milton Friedman talked about it, I was like, what he'd have probably done to Krugman and all the others that follow these policies to the way they've done now, and the monetarists? You'd have probably pulled a big drive-by on them for the fucked upness that they caused deliberately.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. According to F.A. Hayek, Keynes was perfectly okay with the idea that he could possibly be wrong, and he's said, "Hey, listen, if you find out that I was wrong, I'll improve it. I'll admit I was wrong, and I'll start over again." But he never got a chance because shortly after they had that conversation,
he died. Yeah, he fucking died in 46. Exactly, because and he was coming around to it, ready to concede to it. You just need to be open to it. You need to be demonstrated.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote to a few different economists saying, I'm really, thinking we should go back to the idea of the invisible hand.
Yeah.
And that's what's funny. Like that's why I tell people when I learn about this, it's like Keynes would do a drive-by on the central banking cunts, the mega corporate cunts, the politicians that put them in there, and the fucking
he wrote
monetarists and the Keynesians.
He wrote like right after, World War I, or like a year after, that the absolute worst thing you could do is debauch the currency.
No shit, like. Let's inflate it some more. Let's jack off on all of it and make it less of a value. And you wonder why people are playing stonks right now. Because the interest rates kept so artificially lowered.
Oh God, I love that one. I love that one. I love that one Reason TV video, which was something like how the GameStop hearing should have gone. And one of them says, it's like, look, the reason why we're buying stocks is because we can't save anything because interest rates are so low we can't make any money, and if we could, it would be eaten up by inflation. So either fix that or shut the fuck up.
Yeah, some ordinary gamers did a fucking video about the stonks, Wall Street stonks, and game stonks.
Oh, that was another part of the Reason video where, you have the one guy saying, this is like, look, people have the right to freedom of speech, which means that people have the right to say what they want about any stock they want, and other people have the right to buy and sell any other stock they want. It goes back to one of the Reason people who says, how come the only person here who's making any sense at all is sitting in a gaming chair?
Yeah, no shit. Mudahar's a badass. I love that guy to pieces. Like, if I ever got a chance to say hey to him, I'd be like, hey, what's up, brother?
Yeah.
Hang out with him, talk bullshit with him for a bit. Just at least for 5 minutes, because, I appreciate what he does. I appreciate him. I
do hope that the rumors that they were going to do the same thing with silver were just a prank or something, because many people have pointed out that that stuff that they did, the pump and dump thing, it will not work with silver.
They're stupid if they try.
Yeah. It won't work with silver because there's a huge difference between the stocks of a company and the price and precious metal, because there's a lot of companies with precious metal. Because even if a company that processes that metal, goes completely under, the price of the metal itself is still there,
Yeah.
Let me find my little meme I made. The stonks meme I did. Oh, here we are. This is something about the virus. It's in fave quotes if you want to see it. But I basically typed out and said, when you smoke crack, drink white lightning, but wear a mask for COVID health. Fucking. And some fuckers unironically would do this shit.
You know what's funny, Wes and Shane, is that I was having this conversation with Inquisitor in a Discord chat saying that I wish I could draw because I have a funny idea for a short, comic strip that I would love to do, and you know what I'd call it? I'd call it Butts and Booze, and it's about an anthropomorphic cigarette and an anthropomorphic bottle of whiskey, and it's basically pointing out the hypocrisy of a lot of the health departments.
Oh,
I mean,
no
the fact is though, as long as you have good dosage control and do it in moderation, you're a lot safer smoking crack and drinking white lightning than you are, trying to, not doing the things that would avoid getting sick because, COVID aside, there's a lot of stuff out there that'll kill you.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that it was mostly making fun of is that smoking has now recently been treated as the ultimate evil and all that, and I'm like, yeah, well, drinking booze is still around, and not only is it tolerated, in some circumstances it's actually encouraged, and you're considered weird if you don't drink it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will say though, that's another thing that I find so hilarious is that people always dismiss, oh, you're just falling for the big tobacco corporation propaganda, and I'm like, listen, if there's a conspiracy by big tobacco to make babies addicted to cigarettes, they're doing a crappy job at it.
Yeah,
I will say that easily. Like, they tell me this conspiracy, and I'm like, dude, how well are they doing with that? And I make them have to tell me, like, okay, that it's not working, is it? I said, hell to fuck no. If this is so true, why is it at such astronomical levels of ass? It's not effective.
Well, that's the point I keep making about the COVID vaccine, because there's all these different conspiracy theories about how government is trying to do this to make women sterile and to put microchips in us and all sorts of things like that. Well, if that were the case, you would think that they would actually be like wanting people to get it, as opposed to arresting doctors for vaccinating people who aren't on the list just to keep the doses from going bad.
And another thing too, you want to talk about forced vaccination shit? If I was an ethnic Jew and I was called this out enough times, they would call me a self-hating. You know what? I think you know what I'm gonna say. What I would say if I was wanted to be, sharp-tongued about it.
Yeah. Well, yes, Schism. I know banning booze is still a bad idea. The whole point of the idea of booze and butts is that Butts points out that it's like, listen, you think I'm the ultimate evil and you want to pass all these laws so people won't smoke me, but I gotta ask you this: we know, and he actually asked us to Congress. We know all those rules and regulations, they didn't work on booze. Why the hell do you think it's gonna work on me?
Yeah, what I was saying is that there's Ethiopian women of ethnic Jewish descent that were being vaccinated, and that actually was going on, and it got reported on by some independent outlets when they were sterilizing Ethiopian women, and that of Jewish descent. That's where that conspiracy theory comes from.
Well, that's just them being done. That's like when they use the phony polio vaccine to try and find Osama bin Laden's family, and they were doing surreptitious DNA tests.
Yeah. But that's where that conspiracy comes from, because shit like that has happened in the past. But the thing is, if it was going on, we'd have found out just like those instances already.
Oh yeah, I mean, if there were anything, if there were anything in the vaccine that wasn't supposed to be there would be a lot of people blowing the whistle on it.
I think a lot of the reason, like like other libertarians that are that follow you and stuff that openly say I won't take it, it's probably because of all the force oriented bullshit, like aggression oriented bullshit. Like we can force you to not do this, yada yada. You can't get on a boat. You can't get on a plane. And other crazy shit like that. You need to have this kind of card, or we're gonna shoot you if you try to get on. You know, that kind of, or arrest you if you try to get on. That kind of crazy shit.
But my
Which
point
is perfectly
is
understandable. But the
my
fear of the
point
vaccine itself is silly.
My point is, the only way you can be a free individual is to do what you want to do, regardless of what rules surround you. But it's like I said before, when they passed the seatbelt laws here in North Carolina, I knew a lot of libertarians who were, wearing their seatbelt all the time just because, that's a good thing to do. North Carolina passes that law, and they're like, oh, well, the state can't tell me what to do. I'm not wearing my seatbelt. I'm like, but you're still letting the existence of the law change your behavior.
Yeah. Look what happened.
I did coverage of the Texas outages, didn't I? That might have been on the podcast.
We talked about it in the last live stream, if I recall correctly, and how.
Yeah.
And yeah, you were talking about because the left was blaming it on global warming and the right was blaming it on the Democrats or whatever. When the truth is, it was just a rare phenomenon that Texas actually got a pretty nasty winter, and as such, its power line wasn't used to it. So that's all.
Well, and I mean there was the winterizing that they should have done. But I mean, this wasn't any kind of like deregulated free market. It's this monopoly structure that's under the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if we told people that, then we wouldn't have an excuse to blame Man Bear Pig.
Yeah.
Basically.
But of course, we know that it has to be deregulation because it's never, ever, ever been the case before that a large part of the country, like say the Northeast, ever lost power.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually the go-to scapegoat. It's either those evil corporations and their deregulation lobbyists, or it's Man Bear Pig. Sometimes both.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, California too. They had the rolling blackouts and everything, but they blamed that on deregulation, which was silly.
Fucking bullshit.
Yeah, they also
piss off.
Have you actually read? I actually dig up that California law that supposedly deregulated the power market. It's all about they're required to do this, they're restricted from doing that, they're not allowed to do this, they're required to do that. It's like, what the hell kind of deregulation is this?
Yeah.
It isn't one. Like, here's like what pisses me off is I love when these fuckers, pardon me, I'm going to satirize the rhetoric bit that get parroted to me. But this fabulous system's evil. So, like I said, satirizing of rhetoric. I'm like, first off, we haven't been capitalist as of this year 151 fucking years. 2, to say it is such, let me list the fucking the socialist, that's what I call it, socialist, and I piss fucking fascists off when I say, hey, socialist, because they hate the soy boy part in it that I'm implying when I say to them. How are you got to masculate a little too much, didn't you? What I was saying is, I tell them this. I'm like, in the Commie Manifesto, and Lenin's also pointing out, central banking's a good chunk of the way fucking towards what you want, right? I love how they see. They can't even. So they start lashing out. I did this one time in VC, and I basically pulled a Mel Blanc and went, and then they got so mad they couldn't even speak anymore.
or reminds me of those people that are like, well, we're not against the Fed. What we want to do is we want to is we want to actually make it a legit public bank and not a private bank posing as a government bank. And I'm like, when the hell was it ever a private bank?
It's a quasi-private corporation. It's just 7/10. It's just good.
It's a government bank. It's a government bank. I've got a video on this.
It's a fucking government bank. If it's 5 and above, out of 10, you round it off. It's all. If it's 4 out of 10 or smaller, then it's not.
Who has 100% of the decision-making power? Congress. Who gets all of the profits except for the operating funds? The Treasury. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, but they're on the stock market, so that clearly means they're actually a private company.
Except they can't actually buy and sell their stocks, and they can't even use their stocks as collateral for credit.
Also fun fact, and here's something that confuses a lot of people, because I did. When I briefly, was in college for a couple months, I briefly took business education, and the funny part is that, ironically, if you're buying and selling stocks, legally speaking, you're not a private company anymore.
Yeah, that's true, JC. That is true. That is so true. JC said when the state uses the phrase the term deregulation, they generally mean give usually one of their corporate buddies, a state-granted monopoly on a product or service.
Well, and another example I've heard it too is the way, as I've heard from one social policymaker tell John Stossel one time, another way deregulation and also budget cuts work is that rather than actually deregulate, what they say is that it's like, okay, today we were going to approve 20,000 pages of paperwork, but now we're just going to do 10,000 pages of paperwork.
Yep.
Yeah. They're still going to implement the rules. They're just not going to implement as many.
Or they're going to have more wiggle room for the same rules. It's always some type of details like that in action. That's why I when someone talks like a neocon, I ask them if they I ask certain questions. They answer yes to those 5. I'm like, okay, conservative, get out of here. You're literally part of the world's problems. Get the fuck out of here.
It also reminds me of that one documentary I saw, that was trying to talk about the cause of the 2008 recession, and it blamed it all on this one, quote unquote deregulation when they repealed, that one particular bill. I can't remember what it was, and I looked it up, and yes, they did repeal it, but guess what else I noticed? They didn't repeal anything else, and it was just one law out of the hundreds that were still in the book.
Yep. Also, SKM 1091. It's not that there's many words that are open-ended. It's certain use of a lot of words can be used, and they can be so condensed down to be open-ended. That's why rhetoric is so... You could say so much bullshit with as few words, but it's how you use those words in the English language. But it works that way with all the other languages. It's just way easier to do it in the English language. But you're on the right track, but that's more of what it's like in actuality. But yeah, you got it close.
Yeah, sorry, Bradley McPhee, but the mind trick only works on the weak mind, and just because you're stupid doesn't mean you're weak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if having a weak mind meant you were stupid, then Jabba the Hutt would have fallen for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your week? What were y'all's weeks like so far? Y'all's week?
Busy.
Yeah.
In some ways the same. I'm getting back into I'm trying to trying to get to where I can fulfill a childhood dream of mine. One of them, soda crafting.
Oh. I was about to guess, what was your childhood fantasy to climb up Mount Everest in a ballerina tutu?
No.
See if he can make real root beer.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yep.
Real root beer. I already got a couple cherry pop recipes I want to try, especially a black cherry pop one. What was that channel? Glenn and Friends cooking channel or whatever is a great one to check out. I recommend both y'all.
Yeah, but I mean actually Bruce Safrel from Sassafras Root.
Did she say something that, if I recall correctly, like the sassafras root itself isn't illegal? It's just using it to make food or drink.
It's because for that one compound, saffron. And if I remember correctly, what they did was they took they took the average dosage equivalents of root beer and equivalents to the isolated saffron, then concentrated multiple times over after they downsized the equivalent to rats. And then shot them up with it, which, so in the downsized mathematical, the downsized size of the experiment, if you scaled it up to humans, the amount of saffron they got injected with would have been thousands of times, like worth thousands of gallons of fucking root beer, impossible amounts to drink. And that's not even factoring in the antioxidant and other counter factors that work against that carcinogenic property.
Well, yeah, it's true that saffron might be actually be an anti-carcinogen in humans, but I mean even more than that, the metabolic pathway in mice and rats that makes it carcinogenic in the first place isn't a metabolic pathway that even exists in humans.
Yeah, didn't
exactly. That's another thing. So it's a scientifically false regulation to begin with. You could let saffron, exist in the root beer, and it wouldn't harm anybody.
But I mean, you can sell.
Wanted to make a case, which I'm not making a case. If you wanted to make a case, they have a plant. It's a species of pepper plant. The genus pepper. Where long pepper, black pepper, and all that's come from. Except it comes from Mexico, and they use the leaf of it. Hoja Santa. I hope I probably butchered that.
But I mean, you should be able. I don't know if anywhere is selling it, but I mean, it will be legal to buy saffron as saffron. The reason why it's illegal in root beer is it's considered an additive, and you can't add any additives that have been shown to cause cancer in rats.
It's silly, Shane, because you mentioned that they banned it because it's like, oh, it's been found if you drink it, you're at risk of developing liver, kidney, and throat cancer. And I asked, well, even if that was true, you know what else does that? Alcohol.
Alcohol on a regular basis. That's why if I have wine, which I do, I tend to have it with steak or seafood, or I tend to have it with supper, and it's like a little half a teacup, and it's the red wine that I like, which tend to be either my favorites are Pinot Noir, Merlot, or Cabernet Sauvignon. Those are my three preferred choices.
Yeah, but I mean, it's crazy just because, I mean, technically that's what makes root beer, and yet they considered it an additive and not, what the drink's all about. And I mean, they do the same thing with tea, because if you buy tea, the actual tea is an additive. The actual product is water.
Yeah.
Well, what's even funnier is, for instance, I could take, if you know how to get the right ratio of sarsaparilla, sweet sarsaparilla, and sassafras as the dominant three, things, you can actually come really close to imitating A&W, but the ratios have to be tweaked with just a little. Then at the concentrate liquid you make, after you steep it, for a while, because the best way to do it, you get the herbs, put them in the boiling water, let it boil in there for 3 minutes, kill the heat, and then let it steep for, don't go up to 30 minutes, because that's where you start getting the astringency and the bittering compounds and shit, which fucks it up. Strain it off, chill it quick in the jar in an ice bath so the sediment will settle out. It's not hard to do. It just takes it's a little timely, timely.
And Oh,
sorry, but you can essentially come close to root beer A&W naturally.
Also,
if you really
Shalom,
want to.
Missouri.
I was gonna say this, Schism. People who want to dismantle social media by giving government the power. He says it's like trying to replace the fox guarding the hen house with the wolf. I disagree. What they're doing is they're saying, how do we get the fox to stop killing all our chickens? I know. Let's kill the chickens.
Basically,
That way there'll be no chickens for the fox to kill. Problem solved.
that's basically it.
Yeah.
Shalom to Missouri, in case you missed it.
That's what I'm into. We'll get into
Mazel tov.
Sodercraft, and I will be doing that eventually, trying to crack the root beer stuff down. And I'm also got some other projects going on that side.
There is no topic, Missouri, so ask whatever you want.
Yeah.
No such thing as off topic in these.
Yeah. I mean, there was
What's
one
up, Reaper?
I mean, there's one live stream there was one live stream we did a long, long time ago where 75% of the entire live stream was just Shane and one other guy talking about quantum astrophysics.
Yeah, that would have been fourth root.
Yeah.
When it's nerdy science and math, it's probably fourth root.
Yeah, I've also been fucking busy with a bunch of other shit.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm so behind on my videos. You know, my video content I was gonna make.
Well, my thing, SKM, especially with what happened earlier this year with Parler, given the timing of everything with Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and everything else, tell me those companies weren't colluding with the government when they did that. And I'm sorry, if you're colluding with the government, I have no sympathy for you.
Yeah.
Well,
Hoodie Demon just decided to get off on social media and just focus on real life. So
he just quit.
Yeah.
I
mean, he's fine. I haven't really talked to him since he left. We exchanged a little bit after he left. He was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna focus on real life and all that." And, but he was fine.
Yep.
I do know someone in confidence that is able to contact him and talk to him if necessary, if and friends with him. I can't give out who that is, but it's one of those things.
I mean, I could contact him if I really wanted to, but I mean, he wants to be off of all that, so I'm going to respect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
he wants to live in a cabin in the wood with no running water or electricity, and he's free to do that. Yeah. I actually saw a meme about that one time where it's like if you hate society so much, well then why don't you why don't you just go live in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere? No one's stopping you. And then it says Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
I tell people, I'm like,
yeah.
First off, no, it's not how that works. And they're like, why not? I said, you can just leave the country. I'm like, yeah, that's not an argument. Why not? Oh, the fact that you could get the not so U.S. of A. or not so United States nation states of convoluted horse shit, as I call it, will tax you for $20-something hundred fucking dollars just to leave. And they could have you arrested to collect that at any time, anywhere on the planet, and with different international connections.
Just make sure that as many people as possible watch the Waco documentary on Netflix.
Yeah. Yeah, and also Ruby Ridge, that was just so terrible because it's like...
Well, it starts off with Ruby Ridge. They cover Ruby Ridge at the start of it.
Yeah, it's
because a lot of that was what led up to it.
But with Ruby Ridge, it's like how did you know that Randy Weaver was a member of the Aryan Nation? well, he knew a guy who knew a guy who knew his guy's cousin who would have drinks with a member of the Aryan Nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, if you're going to shoot and kill a woman while she's holding her baby, I mean, that's
Yeah.
just no.
Yeah. See, another
That's the
thing
worst.
too is,
And not to
Another
mention,
thing-
and not to mention, the only reason he missed his court date was because the clerk gave him the wrong court date.
Yep.
And rather than
Yeah.
rather than contacting him and saying, "Hey, you didn't show up for court date. What's going on?" They're just like, "Oh, he's skipping bail. Send the marshals after him."
send the SWAT, send the tear gas, send the bombs. Yeah, that all
Well,
works.
they didn't deploy tear gas, but they did send in the marshals, and the marshals were given a shoot to kill order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. The other thing too is, you gotta know how to block detection of different kinds from different scan tools, which is not that hard. You just have to know how to get the foil material to put under your clothes for that. Like, you can block out. You have the ability to block out X-ray and other type of
Yeah, Shane, what's
detection.
this Waco documentary? You said it's on Netflix or
Yeah, Netflix.
what's it called?
Waco.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I got Netflix on my computer now, so
Cool.
yeah. But
There's another interesting one. Did I ever mention before? Did any of you guys that there was a series a grouping of engineers, so a few generations of engineers that got the steam engine perfected using the technological advances of the hot bulb and the gasoline and the diesel engines to work what they figured out to actually improve the actual engines to the point they could, if you brought them back now, they actually could be competitive with the diesel. That's not even factoring domestic grown fucking hemp pellets if you wanted to go that far with it and be oilless or coalless about it.
Shane. It's one misconception I actually hear about that's often ignored in fiction, and I actually read about it from an actual British scientist. You know what he said? One of the biggest myths we have about inventions and all that is that you can't have technology without science. But he actually pointed out that when you think about it, oftentimes the technology comes before the science. And an example he uses is the steam engine. The steam engine was invented long before we learned what quantum mechanics were. I mean, what thermodynamics were.
Well, but I mean, there's like a symbiotic relationship because notice that they had the steam engine, but they didn't do much with it.
Yeah.
Well, by the time this book talks about the compound steam engine type locomotives, I cannot print it. J.T. von something other. It's Russian, I think. Well, the book talks about how the compound steam locomotives were improved upon and modernized and made more efficient, to the point they got it figured out where they could actually run locomotives with it. But because decades they tried and they didn't last, they didn't work too well, or they did work, but it was only very limited speeds and applications. Well, these engineers back in the day actually did this modernization and improvement of steam type, engineering. And this guy from Russia made a whole documentary about it. In this book, Compound Locomotives talks about how they figured out how to do all this shit and make it kick off. But by the time they did, the dieselization of the railroads across the entire planet was already halfway going. And the interest in trying to do that was gone. But it started resurfacing in different places. Like Livio Dante Porta from Argentina, for instance. That dude was a badass because he was one of the last big time greats. He was one of the greats, and he's got a lot of there's a lot of PDFs of his work now for modern, steam engines, what they could do, relating to steam versus locomotives and cost and all that. Like, there's actual simulation and stuff too.
Yeah, SKM.
Wardale.
Yeah, the ancient Romans had the steam engine, but they were basically using it to like raise and lower the gates and city walls, and it was really because they figured out that they could use steam to turn a turbine, but they couldn't go any further with it because without a theoretical explanation of how and why it works, they couldn't really direct it to any other purpose. So they still had horse-drawn chariots. They couldn't, hook a steam engine up to a chariot and, have a horseless chariot because they didn't have that understanding of it.
Yep. And, yeah, these, I linked in fave quotes if you're in the Bogosky server. You can check these out. You can get these books if you decide to take interest in studying them. But I can make a compound engine that works one piston. The big piston could be a uniflow. The bigger secondary piston could be a uniflow one, and the first one be a counterflow piston like traditional, and they can work back and forth with each other. And I would have a much higher thermodynamic efficiency from the, especially through that second use of the steam being a uniflow cycle. And I could do coreless rotor valves in the steam transfer going to the second, the back and forth to the to the second piston to improve efficiency a little bit, minimize a certain amount of moving parts, and further that. Romans had basically the early precursor to any all steam engines. It was a little toy where you had this ball and you had these two little nozzles. One pointed, went down, the other pointed up. Anyways, they shot steam out and make this orb spin. And it would, the more in the water you gave it, put into it, and that was able to boil. And the harder you boiled it, the more, more steam pressure could build up enough to make it spin to a certain faster. And that was a toy that they were, they used to observe how well steam could propel shit. It didn't. It took many centuries later until the first piston steam engines to actually take off, and then the first steam turbine prototypes that even existed back then, like proto turbine systems. Like the Brayton cycle, early Brayton cycle engines and stuff like that actually led to the turbine. They were but that's when they started experimenting more with it. But that was so many centuries later.
I also read somewhere that it wasn't the Romans, but the ancient Chinese, like the BC era Chinese, they actually had access to very primitive electrical devices. They didn't know what to do much with them, but they had like these bronze batteries that if you put them through a certain scenario, they would actually generate electricity. But like Shane said, they just did not have the way to properly, utilize them.
Well, they couldn't get any real, voltage out them. They were mostly using them to do like, copper plating or whatever.
Yeah.
But they they did figure out that it was the same stuff as lightning. So they were way ahead of Ben Franklin on that.
Yeah.
That, and I think the ancient Egyptians knew about how to collect atmospheric electricity to some small extent. What they did with it, we still don't know. But we do know that they had an idea of how to collect it.
I mean, it just wasn't much because they didn't. It goes back to the fact that you need the scientific background to go further with it, because we know that they knew about pi and how difficult it was to work with, because when we look at the pyramids and their other engineering projects, everything is set up so that pi will cancel itself out. So they knew it was difficult to work with, but it also limited them in what they could do. And if they had a method of calculating pi to the level of precision they would have needed, they could have done a lot more than just, building pyramids and chariots.
Yeah.
But they were just limited by the fact that they didn't really know why pi was as messy as it was.
Yep. That's true. Also, SKM, did I say that? Am I saying this correctly? Amritsar massacre? Amritsar? Pardon me if I mispronounced it. Yeah, ancient China was very advanced for its time. Yeah. Look at the two philosophers that basically started classic liberalism and libertarianism.
Yep, but
The
sadly,
founder of fucking Taoism himself, Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching. Are you kidding me?
yeah, but sadly,
Yeah, and then Chuang-Tzu, followed up on a lot of that and just really fleshed it out.
yeah, the idea of libertarianism and all that comes from China, but sadly, it didn't win, and instead Confucius won.
Actually,
Well, it
it's
was
not
really the
Confucianism itself.
it was the legalists who messed
Weird.
everything up.
What?
Yeah, it was more of it's like what'd you just say, Mr. Killian? What was it again?
The legalists.
Yeah, the legalists. It's like this weird bastardization of Confucianism mixed with legalism, and then
Well,
it got worse
just
by
as
the
just
more
as one
close-
example, just as one example, Confucianism is all about, like, if you have a criminal, the idea is not to punish the criminal or to lock him up or whatever. It's to rehabilitate him and bring him back into the fold. And one of the things from that was that for every criminal, you were supposed to get him to confess so that then he could seek and be granted forgiveness and be brought back into society. So you had the requirement basically that you couldn't convict anyone until you got a confession. And so what the legalists did with that is all those wonderful forms of Chinese torture. Because they had to extract confessions. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the legalists. They did that. The worst, the fascistic cancer that came out of Han Dynasty, and then Mao. It's like these three fucking things. That's why where China is at now. Like that's the three. Like that's also true too.
Like
That's that. Master
like
of Muppets. That's also true too.
Like, not to mention, if I recall correctly, didn't the legalists also take a philosophy of confusion out of context? Like, I think if I recall correctly, Confucius said, you should always be, down to earth and never, be a braggart or everything. And basically, the legalists said they use that as an excuse to say, yep. So basically, they're saying you can't act smart because if you speak out or speak your mind, that's expressing yourself, and that's not being humble.
Yeah, if you think you know better than the state, then you're being a braggart. And, yeah.
Yeah.
They were good at manipulating the words of Confucius.
Yeah.
Well, then again, Christians do the same thing with the Bible. They always say, that humans are supposed to be humble. So a lot of church leaders say, so that's why you can't, brag. You can't, have an opinion of your own. But what they really mean by being humble is just, don't be an a-hole about it. It's like, yeah, you're smart, don't be
an arrogant prick. There's two forms of pride. If you learn about Christian theology, there's two forms of pride. Like there's the form of pride where you can be proud of what you've done and take joy in the fact you've done this yourself and stuff. That form of pride, and then there's the pride that'll send you straight to hell. Basically, this arrogance. What we're talking about being one of the examples of the form of pride that'll send you to hell. That's one of the seven.
Well, it didn't say send hell. What it says is pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And the best modern fiction example of that I know is Breaking Bad, because that is exactly what happens to Walter White. Everything that causes him to become what he is because of pride.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, exactly. The funny irony is that so many people like Walter White and they see him identified. But if I recall correctly, the creator of the show pointed out, Walter White is not a guy you're supposed to sympathize with. They talked about how...
because he starts off as a nice guy and he's a simple chemistry teacher at a high school. And I mean, yeah, he wants better for himself, but it's like when he gets diagnosed with cancer, he doesn't want to accept handouts for anyone, and he has to do it all himself, and he has to pay for it all himself. But of course, he's not going to be able to do that as a teacher, so he ends up, having to cook meth to do it because that's the only thing he can think of. But even then, he goes into it with the best of intentions. We're going to make the cleanest meth, that's properly dose controlled. Everyone knows what they're getting. He didn't go into it to be this murderous drug dealer. That's just what he ended up after everything spiraled out of control.
Not to mention, if I also recall correctly, he helped found a successful chemical company, but he dropped out because he was too prideful to come to an agreement with his partner, if I recall correctly.
I forget the exact story, but yeah, he sold out for like $5,000, and then the company ended up making billions.
Yeah.
Of course, he had no way of knowing that at the time, but
yeah, but
but I mean, that's the thing. His business partners were like, "Look, as far as we're concerned, a third of this business should be yours. We'll bankroll it," and he just wouldn't. He wouldn't take it from him.
Yeah, because of his pride.
Yep.
I'm gonna head out, guys. But in just a moment.
All right.
But before I do, picture this. Try to picture, if you will. This is what I'm going to try to work on make soon, because it's like got a bunch of crawfish meat on sale. Crawfish, shrimp, bacon, mac and cheese.
I still laugh though at people that think that Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead take place in the same universe.
Oh, that's kind of weird.
It's all because in a prequel to The Walking Dead, a drug dealer wakes up in the zombie apocalypse and he was caught with a blue pill. It's like, hey, Walter White's meth was blue, so therefore it takes place in the same universe. Ignoring, there's a lot of drugs that are blue in color.
Yeah, I was part of a like years ago, back when it was in the original run. There was I don't remember if it was on Facebook or where, but there was a Breaking Bad fan group, and one of the things we did was establish that Bryan Cranston's character in Breaking Bad, Malcolm in the Middle, and Babylon 5 were all the same person. He starts out in Babylon 5 because he was just a guest spot in one episode. He was commanding a White Star. And what's Walter's last name?
Walter White.
Walter White, because he was commanding a White Star. And then at the end of the battle, his White Star actually gets sent through a time rift back in time. And, so he starts being the family man. And then later on when he's, diagnosed, and we had this thing where he didn't remember his life as a White Star captain, but he did kind of remember it in his subconscious. And so he knew he was supposed to be, something greater than what he was. He was supposed to be this, ranger commanding a White Star, and that was where his pride came from. So it's fun being a fan.
That would explain the Malcolm in the Middle episode where Hal gets that temporary job where basically they do all these weird experiments on him, and when he goes back to tell him he's not interested in the job, he finds out the building that he applied at is no longer there.
Meth never blue. Yeah, there was an analysis that some chemists had done to say, why the meth would have been blue and why it wouldn't have been as pure as all of that, because whatever it was that made the meth blue, and there were a bunch of different possibilities, but that would have interfered with the purity of it, because pure meth should be clear. And, Vince Gilligan was like, well, that's just for TV, it was a color that was distinctive that we could use, there wasn't any. I mean, he had, all these chemists telling him what was, so the mistakes he made were mistakes on purpose. That's how it is.
But it's crazy, And that's another thing too. It's like going back to what I said about The Walking Dead and all that. It's like some people just can't seem to realize sometimes an Easter egg is just an Easter egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just people sometimes take some of the stuff too seriously sometimes. Though speaking of The Walking Dead, I still do not understand how the zombies were able to overwhelm the military in a tank. You know, it's like that's just so silly. You know.
I don't understand why anyone thinks it's a good show.
Yeah, me neither. I saw a couple episodes and I'm just like, you know. And the biggest problem too, and a lot of people have pointed out, is that there's not a lot of zombies. It's all about, you know, human conflict, and people are like, well, that's kind of the whole point and all. But it's like, well, then what's the point of having zombies? You know.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
mean, zombies as they're generally depicted. I mean, there have been good zombie movies, of course, but the way they're generally depicted, it's like, oh no, we're being chased by zombies. Quick, let us escape at a brisk trot. You know.
Yeah. And in all honesty, another thing that I'm getting so sick and tired of is the whole zombie virus, you know, thing. Just because, I'm sorry, you know, it worked in Resident Evil, but when you try to do it today, it just sounds pretentious, especially when you put all the medical babble. And it's like, you know, they talk about how, see, it turns you into a zombie by detaching the RNA molecule on your center cerebral cortex. And here I'm thinking, saying, yeah, you just looked up parts of the brain and virus DNA on Wikipedia.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just you're regurgitating a dictionary.
Yeah, probably the most hilarious, you know, thing I've heard about, you know, how a virus would turn people into zombies, as they say, is that the virus infiltrates your cells and then it regenerates the cells in a different way and all that. And I'm like, aren't viruses supposed to destroy cells? That's how they make you sick.
I think I think zombies are just like the 21st century, you know, idea of post-apocalyptic fiction, because we don't really have the Soviet Union to give us this big threat of nuclear war. And so what previously would have, you know, been the precursor of nuclear war, you know, is now the precursor is, you know, most people being turned into zombies. I mean, George Romero always said the way you made a good zombie movie was you didn't focus on how bad zombies were, you focused on how bad people could be in the face of them.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing too, that I think is the reason why I didn't like The Walking Dead either, is because it came out during a time where every single horror movie and TV show was about zombies. It's like Pride and Prejudice and zombies. It's Zombieland, zombies this, zombies that, zombie, you know.
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln Zombie Hunter.
Vampire Hunter.
Or Vampire. Okay.
Actually, when I heard about that, I'm like, wow, vampires? Wow, haven't heard one of those. In all honesty, vampires
what I thought of SKM, I was just I never intending to write this up, but just kind of as a mental exercise, thinking how you could do a good zombie movie. My idea was not to use a virus, but there's a parasite that will take over the body of a crab and it'll just grow its tissues through there. So you have something like that in a human where it grows its tissues around the skeleton and it kills the person, but it's using the skeleton for its own structure. And so it's just, you know, walking the human corpse around like a puppet. And then I got this idea of, you know, it could actually incorporate multiple skeletons as it grows bigger and bigger, and the bigger it gets, the smarter it gets, and the harder it is to fight. You could end up like this huge, you know, multi-story meta zombie at the end, you know, like the big boss for the level that the characters would have to figure out how to kill.
So kind of like The Thing. Except the thing doesn't use your skeleton, it uses your cells, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Thing, I'm trying to remember the movie, but really it wasn't that. See, because what I'm thinking of is the more humans that it takes over and the more skeletons it can incorporate into itself, the bigger it can grow. The bigger it can grow, the smarter it gets.
Well, if I recall correctly, The Thing did that too. You know, the more cells it assimilates into its body, and the bigger it gets, the more intelligent and sapient it becomes.
Maybe. It's been a while.
because in the movie, when it breaks off into smaller pieces, the smaller pieces are more primal and animal-like, but when it gets bigger and when it takes over a human, it's able to start thinking, rationalizing, and even strategizing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the same thing I'm thinking.
Yeah.
The way you would have to kill it is first you'd have to like blow it apart into smaller pieces. And the smaller pieces would be independent, but they wouldn't be as smart.
Well, yeah, that's how they defeated the thing in the movie. They blew it apart into smaller pieces and then burned it.
Yeah.
Because the only way to truly kill it was you had to kill every single individual cell, and the only way to do that is an explosion or fire.
But what I'm thinking of, see, I don't know how burning would work on this, because what I'm thinking of is like it's really fibrous because it's wrapped around, your skeletons, replacing your muscles and tendons. And that tends to not burn very well. Which means you wouldn't be able to kill the zombie by beheading it or burning it. No, you'd have to get a lot more creative with it.
But yeah,
and I mean, there's also no reason why it wouldn't be fast either. I mean, it could be like a sprinter. Instead of just lumbering around like zombies usually do, the thing could sprint.
Yeah.
Once it learns how to control, the form that is taken over, it would get fast.
Actually, I've heard from an actual epidemiologist saying another reason why a zombie apocalypse would never work is because the zombie virus is always transmitted through bites. But here's the thing. Biting is not an effective way at spreading a disease.
Well, it spreads disease through saliva, and you're not going to produce saliva once you're dead.
Yeah, that too,
Yeah.
I
mean, that's the problem with, like, the reanimator. Okay, you inject this into a corpse, and it reanimates the corpse. Yeah, but if you inject something, it gets to the rest of the body by circulation, but if you're dead, there's no circulation.
It's another dumb explanation for why the virus makes people crave human flesh is that it's like because it damages your brain and your brain's basically operating on safe mode and it's only focused on primal functions. But here's the thing: people can already enter a state like that if they have a severe brain injury or a stroke, and they don't turn into cold-blooded cannibalistic monsters. What they actually do is that they behave like infants. They start moving around, they start sucking with their lips, stuff like that.
Yeah. I haven't played Half-Life SKM, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, they don't suddenly develop a craving for brains and start eating people.
Yeah, you'd basically have to nuke it or vaporize it somehow or something like that. It would take a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just zombies are just not a great enemy. I mean, it might be fun, for like a computer game when you're one of the ones, fighting them off, and the game can give you challenges and there's gameplay and levels and things like that. But for like a movie or a TV show, it
doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny because, I see so many people try to justify how the zombies would defeat the military and all that, and they'd be like, well, the zombies are too slow and cumbersome for the machine guns and the tanks and all that. It's like, listen, you don't even need the weapons in the tank. All you gotta do is full speed ahead and crush them. Because that's all they're gonna do. All they do is just stand there and walk towards you and look for brains. All you gotta do is just ride over them.
Yep, just drive a tank over them.
Yeah. In all honesty,
or a big truck or whatever. Yeah.
And that one movie, I honestly forgot what it was called. It's not I Am Legend, but it's where vampires cause the apocalypse. That's more realistic because vampires are actually intelligent and they can strategize.
Here's another question. How does a zombie know where you are?
Yeah.
Because if their eyes are rotted away, they can't see you, and by that time your inner ear would have rotted, so they wouldn't be able to hear or anything.
Yeah, exactly. They're like
you no longer have the part of the brain that can process smells.
Yeah.
Because that's actually a pretty sophisticated part of the upper brain that does that.
Yeah, sorry, zombie apocalypse LARPers, but the movie Reign of Fire is more realistic than a zombie movie. You've seen Reign of Fire, right, Shane?
I have not seen that, no.
Basically, Reign of Fire is a movie where the apocalypse is brought on by dragons.
Okay. Well, why not?
Well, yeah, and it's actually kind of understandable what happens because the dragons in the film have super thick, tough armor that even heavy artillery struggles to penetrate.
Yeah.
And since most of the weaponry we use is not meant to be used on creatures like them, they're able to go around, burn everywhere. And some nations panic and they launch their nukes at them, thinking that'll work, and it doesn't work, of course. So that's what brings on the apocalypse.
Hmm.
Is basically the dragons just cause enough death to create a mass panic that the governments destroy themselves in an act of stupidity because they think, hey, if we nuke everything, that'll kill the dragons.
But I mean, a dragon like that would be kind of like a an animal capable of doing a napalm strike or something.
Yeah, that's basically what they do. They go around and they napalm all the world capitals. And like I said, the government's in desperation because the conventional weapons don't work on them. Just basically nuke everything because they think, well, they can't survive nukes, can they? And it turns out they can survive nukes.
I don't know, SKM. I've purged everything except the first 2 Terminator movies from my memory because they were crap.
Yeah,
First 2 were awesome. Rest are crap.
Not to mention, if Skynet truly was an intelligent and sapient AI and he was told, you got to protect the United States, the thing he would do is hack into our nuclear weapons program and launch them all into outer space. Yeah, not hit anything, just get rid of them.
But I mean, that wasn't really what was they didn't really have a chance to do anything else as an intelligent life form because as soon as it happened, they panicked and tried to pull the plug, and he acted out of self-preservation.
Well, that was another thing too. Also, is because the later expanded universe in Terminator tried to portray Skynet as this malevolent being, that was plotting and scheming, like Terminator 3 infamously did. But if I recall correctly, he wasn't malevolent. He was just operating on his programming, and he interpreted it differently than we did. Because
from the first 2 movies, it kind of sounds like it was more like a dog biting a threat, and we were a threat to him, and the only bite he had was the nuclear arsenal.
So. Yeah, I mean, as the Terminator said in the second movie, humans became scared because Skynet was becoming more and more intelligent, and they were afraid they would turn on him, so they tried to shut him off. Skynet saw this, and he, in his program of self-preservation, activated in, but he couldn't do anything. But he couldn't do anything to attack them because he wasn't allowed to attack the United States. So he launched nuclear missiles at Russia and China because he knew they would launch missiles back.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I don't know. I think War Games is a better depiction of that.
Yeah.
With Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that. That's that movie where there's that robot that's been programmed, that AI that's been programmed to figure out, you have to figure out how to survive a nuclear war, and like it goes through all the simulations, and it comes to a conclusion with the help of Matthew Broderick that.
Well, because what's going to happen is it's actually deciding that it's time to launch a nuclear war, and they're trying to convince it not to do that, and it's running through all these simulations, and so what Broderick ends up doing is loading up a tic-tac-toe game, and he has the computer play against himself, because if 2 people play tic-tac-toe and don't make any mistakes, it's a tie every time. And so he's playing all these tic-tac-toe games while he's doing all of these nuclear simulations, and each time it's just a loss for both sides. And so finally it stops, and the computer says, "Interesting game. The only way to win is not to play."
Yeah. Well, SKM, I think Kyle Reese mentioned in the first Terminator movie that, contrary to what some later portrayed, Skynet didn't kill off all humans, just a majority of them, and it kept the remainder, basically for maintenance duty, basically. Because
I mean, it was far from all humans, because you still had enough, to have the resistance and everything else. So yeah, it was keeping humans. I think it was keeping them pretty much as slave labor.
Yeah, I think Kyle Reese mentioned that. Yeah, that a decent portion of humans were kept alive, for for maintenance and to rebuild, basically.
But that's why it had to make the Terminators, because when humans kept rebelling against the machines, they needed a way to infiltrate them, and so they had to make the Terminators to be as human-like as they could, right down to things like bad breath.
Oh, yeah.
Which means it's one of the few times where you actually have a realistic reasons for the machines to be humanoid.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, other than just arbitrarily wanting them to look like humans, there's no good reason for it.
Yeah. Other than to have one of your characters say, "Oh my God, X is a goddamn robot." So, terrible news though. That actor that played Parker in Aliens, he died. He died 2 days. Yeah. Yeah, you remember Alien, right? Ash is a goddamn robot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's another one where the first two were great, the rest were crap.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, from what I heard, nobody really wanted to work on Alien 3, but they had to bring it back. And to the director's defense, I've actually heard they interviewed him and they asked him, like, why did Alien 3 turn out the way it did? And he basically said, well, truth be told, I didn't have much to work on because the studio kept making all these demands. Sigourney Weaver was making demands.
Didn't she basically say she would only come back if they killed off her character?
Well,
I think that's why they killed her character at the end, because she didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's true. I mean, and actually, fun fact, that's also why Michael Biehn didn't want to be in the movie, because they actually asked him to come back so they could use him for the funeral scene, and he's like, "Oh, so my character dies? Okay, well, how does he die?" It's like, "Oh, he dies at the beginning because the safety rod, because he gets punctured." He's like, "Wait a minute, I just die at the beginning?" Yeah, like I don't die sacrificing myself to save Ripley or anyone, because Michael Biehn said he was okay with Hicks dying as long as it was like a heroic character death, but the fact that it was just like, "Oh no, he dies because he gets impaled by a safety rod." It's like, come on, man. I survive. It's like Hicks survives all that events and Aliens just for that to happen. That's actually the main reason I didn't like the third Aliens movie. Is just it's so mean spirited. It's like,
yeah,
it's like nope. Ripley doesn't win. Everything bad happens. Every time she does win, it gets taken away with her again. It's like, why? Yeah, apparently Lex Hendrickson didn't like the movie either, and he specifically stated that, because he read the script and he's like, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? Do you have clinical depression or something? Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
I don't know. I think it's just like if you're making a movie, not because you have a good idea for it, but just as a cash grab, then that's all you've got to go on. And so you just have to make it just like the others.
Well, yeah, that's all it was. It was just a remake of Alien 3, and...
Mm-hmm. Well, that doesn't work, SKM. People have actually tried it, because there was this idea in the 60s that all the psychedelic rockers were getting high and then playing stuff, and it was on the album. They had actually tried it. And when you're high like that, and you're playing all this music, or you're taking all these notes for all the things you're doing, at the time, you think you're coming up with all this great stuff. Then you come down from it and you sober up and you go, okay, let me listen to what I did or look at these notes. And it's just random, meaningless garbage. You just cannot be creative like that.
I saw a comedy joke like that one time, where they're going to a Fish concert, but they're out of drugs, and they're like, "Oh no, we're out of drugs. What? You can't go to a Fish concert without drugs. Everyone knows their music's horrible when you're sober."
Fish is a jam band. That's what they are. As long as you understand that, you can enjoy them. Fish is about jamming.
Well, yeah, and going back to the whole drugs thing, if I actually recall correctly, Velvet Underground is famous for some of its albums, and Lou Reed himself said that a lot of his early work he doesn't like doing because when you listen to it, it's basically just noise. And when they asked him, but it was so experimental, what inspired you to write music like that? He's like, I don't know. I was told make something memorable, and I was high on heroin, and I wrote whatever was on my mind. And some of it was good, and some of it was garbage.
What's your favorite horror movie? I think again, it's a superlative, so I'll probably give you a different answer each time. I think this time I'm going to say Psycho.
Oh.
It was just a great movie.
Yeah.
Just perfect from start to finish.
Yeah, and a lot of people.
Oh my God, Hitchcock was a genius.
Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, fun fact: a lot of people don't realize this. But Psycho was actually based off of a book.
Yeah.
And I read a little bit of it, and talk about polar opposites because Norman Bates in the book is completely different from Norman Bates in the movie. Because in the movie, Norman Bates is a big mama's boy, but in the book, he hated his mother. He hated her with a burning passion, and he only did what he did after he got drunk and did a bunch of drugs.
Well, in the movie, it wasn't just that he was a mama's boy. It was kind of a love-hate thing.
Yeah.
And I need to watch the movie again, because I'm thinking that it was kind of implied that he murdered his mother. And that's kind of the part of what sent him over the edge, because he loved her, but he hated her because she was domineering and controlling, and so.
Well, I mean, Ed Gein. He was based off of Ed Gein, so.
Yeah.
Although,
think about The Wizard of Oz. That was 1939. No one was doing that stuff then, and that's what people are saying. Like songs like "Puff the Magic Dragon." Oh, that's clearly about drugs. The people who wrote it was like, no, we were total squares. No one was doing drug music at that time. That was before all of that.
Or another good example is Alice in Wonderland. Like, so many people analyze the heck out of Alice in Wonderland, and they like, is this about drugs? Is this about mathematics? And the author himself said, no. If you clearly read the ending of both books, it clearly says Alice was dreaming.
Yeah.
That's all it was. She fell asleep, took a nap, had a weird dream, and that's what Alice in Wonderland is. She's dreaming. Yeah, she wasn't taking any drugs. She wasn't on an acid trip. She wasn't talking about the philosophical whole thing of existence. She was just dreaming. And that explains why a lot of the characters are self-contradictory and make no sense, because that happens all the time in a dream. Heck, I had a dream one time that I was forced to go back to school, and I was told you have to go back to school because you did poorly and all that. And I explained, okay, if I did so bad in school, why was I allowed to graduate?
But you gotta wonder, with things like movies or songs or whatever, whenever someone shows just a little bit of uniqueness and creativity and imagination, people say, oh, well, it must be because they were doing drugs. I mean, how disrespectful can you get, not just to the artists themselves, but to humanity in general?
Yeah, exactly. It's like... Yeah, and that's another thing too, because I watch a YouTube video called Rock and Roll History, and contrary to what, TV shows like Family Guy say this idea that you have to be on drugs to be a good musician, that is not true, because if you read Rock and Roll History, you find out that often, in most of the cases, it's actually drug of a musician.
You cut out there for a second. I didn't hear what it was.
I was saying is that contrary to popular belief, drugs don't just make you creative as a musician. It actually, when you look at the history of a lot of bands, their downfall is when their drug use got out of control. Like I think a good example is the Beatles. When they were more square and they kept their drug use to a minimal, they made some classic rock and roll songs. But once they started, embracing their inner druggie and hippies, they made all these strange songs that were hit or miss. And it's like,
you have to be sober to be a good. You have to be sober to be a good musician.
Yeah. I mean,
but a lot of times, like, but a lot of times, like, drawing a blank on it. Sid Barrett, one of the founders of Pink Floyd. He was doing a lot of drugs and, just went from being this towering musical genius to, someone who didn't even know what song he was supposed to be playing at the time. But I mean, what they didn't really understand was it wasn't just he got on drugs and became an asshole. He was really self-medicating because he had delusional schizophrenia, and that was what was driving him to the drugs.
Wasn't he the guy that the song "Wish You Were Here" was inspired by?
Yep, and "Shine on You, Crazy Diamond." Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that whole "Wish You Were Here." I think that whole "Wish You Were Here" album.
Yeah. Contrary to what some people think, "Wish You Were Here" wasn't mourning about the death. It was actually mourning their friend, because by that point he was so addicted to drugs and his schizophrenia was so out of control that, according to one of the band members, I don't know if it was David Waters or the other guy, but
Roger
the inspiration
Waters
came from because he was visiting. Yeah, because he was visiting them on set, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm just in the neighborhood and I'm gonna come and visit you." And they were showing him around, and suddenly, out of nowhere, he sat down and he said, "Okay, so what tempo do you want me to start?" Because he thought he thought they invited him over to play. He legitimately thought that, and they clearly saw he's not in his mind. He's not even here, mentally.
But when they were, it was a complete coincidence. When they were recording "Shine on You, Crazy Diamond," he just kind of showed up to say hello.
Yeah.
And they said, all right, and they talked for a while, and then he just left, and they didn't see him again until, I think it was David Gilmour's wedding. He just showed up at the reception. And they're like, oh, great, it's great to have Sid back, and all that. And then at some point, someone mentioned to Gilmour, it's like, hey, your friend Sid is like, yeah, he just left. I don't know why. He just, okay, and that was the last he saw of him.
And I mean, listen here, people. Here's proof once and for all that you don't need to be on drugs to be a good musician. Just look at Frank Zappa.
Oh yeah. You would think if you had to look at someone in history and guess who was on drugs, Frank Zappa would have been at the top of the list, and yet he was almost a complete teetotaler.
Yeah.
I mean, he named his daughter Moon Unit and his son Dweezil while he was in a completely sober frame of mind.
Yeah, Penn Jillette was the same way too. He never, he's never had a drink of alcohol. He's never done the illicit drugs, and yet he's a pretty interesting character.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, he and his wife named their daughter Moxie Crime Fighter.
The Crime Fighter, he said, was his wife's doing. He thought Moxie was a good idea for a name, but apparently, like in his wife's family, they don't really do middle names, and so she was like, "Well, let me just think of a middle name." She came up with Crime Fighter on the idea that when she gets old enough to drive, and the cop pulls her over, she can hand over her license and say, "Officer, we're actually on the same side. Crime Fighter is my middle name." And he'd say, ha, 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 and then she'd hand over the license and go, oh. Moxie Crime Fighter Gillette.
Actually, Schism, the real reason why a lot of stars go nuts is actually because of the societal pressure they get, Well,
I mean, if you're talking about, like, bands, a lot of it's the agents doing that. Because they're giving them uppers and everything to try and keep their energy levels up through their concerts. Pretty much exactly how it's depicted in Pink Floyd The Wall.
Yeah, exactly. I mean...
Oh, you got a problem? We need to get you up and going for the show. Let's inject you with something.
Yeah, that's what the song Comfortably Numb's all about. It's all about Pink, he's sick, he's sick and he's clearly not fit to perform, and rather than take him to a doctor, they just inject him with some kind of stimulant, and, he's good to go. He's good to go for the concert, but he's not healed,
that's when the worms take over his brain. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear in the song that Pink is physically sick. He's sick both in the head and physically, because he's describing, he feels hot and he presumably has some kind of illness, and like you said, the guy is just like, oh, you're not sick. You just need a little something to get you going.
Well, and in the movie, it's because he's had a psychotic break.
Well, yeah, I know. I've seen the music video, but lyric-wise, it's a little of both,
Yeah, that sounds like Heather's home, so I need to wind it up. But yeah, that's
okay.
The movie is just awesome if you haven't. And it's something else that everyone says, oh, well, you're going to watch. Well, I've never been a drug guy, never been one to get high, never, been one to get drunk or anything like that. And I love that movie, and it's some of the best animation that's ever been done because it's a combination of live action and animation, and it's not like any other movie you've ever seen.
Yeah, I've seen bits of it in the Pink Floyd music videos because I know for the official music videos they use bits from the movie.
Well, watch the whole movie. It's really good. I mean, it'll give you nightmares. If you're prone to nightmares, it'll give you nightmares.
Yeah.
Let's see. Recommended being a star should be a part-time thing. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up and chatting. Thanks to Chris and Wes.
Okay.
Any parting shots before we go, Chris?
Hope you get better, Shane.
Thanks, man. And thanks everyone who supported this channel. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay strong